this session. If you dig it, they will come. Got a great panel here for this discussion. Looks like we're going to go until about 3:20. So we have 40 minutes or so. Our moderator, Lynne Yocom with UDOT, and we'll turn the time over to her, and she'll introduce the rest of the panel. Thanks.
This is a great panel for me to introduce. I've been able to work with each one of these companies at UDOT. We open up our conduit and road systems to help with broadband deployment and encourage it and partner and do these public-private partnerships is what we call it, to help promote broadband activities in the state of Utah, because by promoting broadband and helping the carriers get to where they need to go promotes economic development, which in cycle gives us a better economy within Utah and gives me more dollars for my roads and my conduit. So it's a cycle that we really, really like. We've got Larry Price right here. He's with Syringa. And Syringa, we've built a lot on I-15 clear up into the Idaho border, and they've helped us with a lot of Logan area that we've been doing. And we've got Brad Welch right here with Centracom. I've known Brad now 15 some odd years when Spencer and Steve and I first did the first agreement. Spencer Cox, our Attorney General. Lieutenant Governor, sorry. Thank you for that correction. We did one of the very first public-private partnerships with the state of Utah and UDOT, and that was, my phone should not be on. If you can see it and turn that off, that is really embarrassing. Just grab that switch. We did one of the first public-private partnerings to be able to put conduit within the roads, and Centracom has been a great company to work with. And we have Scott Wilson right here with Beehive, and Beehive with our area through Tooele and connectivity that we couldn't get. We have a camera now sitting at the top of Johnson's Pass, believe it or not. And that was a critical part of transportation for us, to get that camera feed to that weather station to see if everyone was able to go down or to keep the traffic out of there. And I saved Lynne for last because his name is the same as mine, Lynne Beecher, who's we've worked with Skywire. But he's had a few iterations throughout the years, so I had to go back and clear back in my American Fork days. I was working with Lynne. He's been a great partner. So we have a great panelist here, and we're going to start right here to my left with Scott Wilson and let you start and talk about your company and with what you're doing with the broadband and what we're kind of doing. So go ahead, Scott.
All right, I'll try not to take too much time here if we can actually get to some questions and things. But Beehive Broadband has been started out as a rural telco some years ago, and ended up covering the West Desert, rural parts of Utah and eastern Nevada. In 2003, we developed we began a wireless ISP and grew that to the point where we sold off the subscriber base there and put it all into fiber. And we've been doing fiber builds long before I was at Beehive, but for some years now. And one of the great partnerships that Beehive has been able to take advantage of in its history is that it has with UDOT. And Lynne already made mention of sort of the relationship that UDOT has with a lot of the carriers, obviously those of us here and others, where we're able to take advantage of infrastructure that UDOT has put in place and do trades and swaps and so forth, so that we can provide them with services, with infrastructure, whatever, to cameras, to roads, to areas of the state that they're needing to get connectivity to, in exchange for this opportunity to expand our network into areas that we can help with economic growth and so forth. So it's been a great thing for Beehive to be a part of. In addition to working with UDOT, we've some of the neat projects that we've done actually in with the help of UDOT has been things like Morgan County. We went to, I guess, what was it, the mayor of Morgan came to an event similar to this a couple years back, and just felt like they weren't getting the connectivity that they needed up there. That businesses and residents were suffering from poor connectivity, and so with the help of UDOT and GoEd and others, Beehive got involved, and we've been able to now build a hybrid fiber coax network up there in Morgan, and have started serving the people up there. There's been a fantastic response in the short, I guess, 4 or 5 months that we've been doing that up there. So there's a lot of these opportunities, and it means working closely with municipalities, city officials, GoEd, UDOT, so forth and so on. I think UEN is another great example of public-private partnership to some degree. It's done a little bit differently, but UEN is this state organization that provides connectivity with the help of carriers to schools, libraries, universities, and so forth throughout the state. I think that we're lucky here in Utah. I mean, we work a little bit in Nevada, Colorado, a few of the surrounding states, and we do not see the same type of excitement, energy, commitment to public-private partnerships like this. It's very challenging in other states to work with municipalities the same way that it is here, or the state agencies and so forth. And so we really are lucky. We have state agencies, public agencies that are committed to economic development here in Utah, and I think that ends up being a benefit to us as carriers and providers, and to municipalities and businesses and residents alike. So we're happy to be a part of what's going on here in Utah.
So I'm Brad Welch with Centracom. To build on what he said, we have worked great with UDOT, been able to do a bunch of opportunities, help UDOT light up signs in areas, continue to build the areas. A success story for us recently was Delta and Fillmore, which was a joint project with more than just UDOT. It was UDOT, UEN participated in that project. We were able to do some stuff with some schools down there. We even had some federal funds that were made available. We really believe in public-private partnerships so much we gave up one of our best executives to the public sector, and we'll always fill that hole. But it's a good thing, and it brings awareness for all of what we're trying to do. Spencer had a great understanding of this, and so he takes that into his new position up there and continues to tout those things. A little bit about the panel that they talk about. These things, the UDOT trades, the UEN building out, all those other things help us build the networks closer. I think the panel kind of has a focus on, as a city or other areas that needs bandwidth, how do we get it there? You can't just build out the access network within your city. You have to have backhaul. All of these things that we mentioned, the UENs, the UDOTs, those things all help us with the backhaul. The other thing is just also a shout out to everybody up here. I mean, we work together. I trade fiber with Beehive. Beehive trades lit services and fiber with me. No different than what we're doing with UDOT. Same with Syringa. And if we were down by Lynne, I'm sure we'd want to do that there too. But it's a smart way to do it. Capital is not unlimited for us. We've got to be smart about it, and you work together and you find out the best fit. The best marketing people that have the relationships with certain people and those things, you just facilitate other people and make sure you're doing the job. So I also want to leave some time, so I'll pass it off to Larry.
Thank you, Brad. As Larry Price, I run marketing and sales for Syringa Networks. We're headquartered out of Boise, Idaho, but having said that, our fastest growing market is Utah. For everything that these gentlemen have articulated, and Lynne as well, particularly the kickoff from UDOT has been outstanding, and it's been that way for quite some time. We're a 15-year-old company. We were born to support our rural fiber owners or telcos, and that was back in very early 2000. And now we've been on somewhat of a hockey stick, and we've actually grown larger than our owners. So we have the ability now to stretch out and benefit our owners, but the main benefactors is our business clients. We don't do any residential. If you boil us down, we're a large data pipe provider to your favorite ISP. We have about 100 employees, circa 60 million and some change at this point. And as I mentioned earlier, Utah is our absolutely fastest market. With the help of UDOT and these gentlemen here, we're going to have about 800 of our own organic glass in the Utah area, in the state of Utah. So we're very happy to be here. And we're not about giving bandwidth away for free, as much as the current administration would like it to be that way. And we're very serious about adding value-add services to our clients. So I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Lynne Beecher. I'm going to start a little bit further back for Lynne's to explain a little bit about how I know Lynne. I worked for Pacific Corp for 20 years. I designed power lines, general business manager over anybody that used $20,000 a month. I babysat them, literally. And anything they wanted, I gave them. So I learned a little bit about how to take care of large customers, which are very important. In 1998, I jumped out of Pacific Corp, and I learned what dial-up was, 56K dial-up, and I did it in Provo with iProvo fiber. And as I worked with iProvo fiber, I found all sorts of things that we didn't know. Literally did not know. We put fiber in cable TV cables, and learned what that takes. We put it through the air wirelessly off of fiber access points, and learned how difficult wireless was back then with absolutely no equipment that worked. And then I started really trying to understand the fiber side of iProvo. And it was really fun. And then I jumped over to American Fork also while I was doing iProvo, and that's where I met Lynne. And I was an ISP, and basically the only one that paid my bills, so it was a lot of fun. Learned a lot, enjoyed it. Then I jumped down south and found a group called Interlinks that we worked and took fiber through St. George and Cedar City and southern Utah, and the trials we had there, the long distance where there's no fiber except for UDOT conduit and Water Conservancy conduit, and we worked and found conduit. That was way important. A big thing was educating people. If fiber was there, who wanted it? Not a lot of people, because they did not understand what fiber can do. Fiber is so exciting and has so much potential that now you get fiber, and everything that's going to come down the road in technology is going to be handled. So lots of fun. I'm going to give you a little wake-up test here. Do you think you can pass? Okay, let's see who can tell me what the K bytes are. Everybody knows that, kilobytes. Okay, the M bytes, or meg. That's the megabytes. What is the gigabytes? Okay, that's the next thing. Is there anything past that? What's the P byte? Can you tell me? Peta. It's coming. And whatever equipment we have at the head end and whatever equipment we have in the building is what can be received. And that's what it's all about. I hire a lot of young, smart guys. And these young, smart guys are amazing. And I love them to death. And that's way important. But anyway, that's my story.
Okay, we're going to turn it just a bit here. You've kind of got a history of who you were talking with up here, but we need to know how we can help you within the audience if you're coming from communities and you're looking to be able to have help with maybe dig once policies, etc. We can tell you kind of what we've done. We can let these guys reply to what do they need from the communities that you represent to be able to help them when the conduit comes in. We're doing pretty good with the state level on our roads and that type of coordination, but we seem to be lacking on trying to get into the city dig once policies. We run through a lot of the cities, so that helps provide the backbone transport. But with dig once policies, I have watched 2 communities let a golden opportunity go past, and it's the one I live in, Pleasant Grove City. A full pressurized irrigation system. Every single road was dug up and a drop was done to every single house. And the city did not have the foresight to be able to put conduit within the system. American Fork City, when I left, I begged them to please put the conduit system in with the pressurized irrigation system. It would be the biggest mistake. And I said there are companies out there that will come in and will help populate that conduit. And they said, oh, I'm sorry, but we just can't justify that extra expense. And I go, you can't justify the extra expense of the pavement? The pavement is your biggest expense when you open those roads to put them back. And now I drive on some of the most horrendous roads because of that pressurized irrigation system that's breaking apart. And we still don't have the conduit, and we have one main provider within Pleasant Grove, which I get great speeds, but I would like a little competition and a little bit more choice. That would be a great thing. And competition is a good choice for Utah, because the more providers we get, the better services that I believe that are provided. And as a customers, you actually get a little competition and better pricing. I think we have some of the better broadband pricing within the United States. So now we're going to take some questions from our audience. Does anybody have a question? And I'll bring down the microphone to you.
Thanks so much. My name is Bill Kobabe, and I work for Morgan County, and I'm on the Morgan City Council. So thank you very much, Beehive Broadband, for coming out. My question is, what have we done? You mentioned Morgan in particular, and what was it about Morgan that made your experience so good? And what can we do to help maybe some of these other folks look at Morgan for business and other kinds of things?
Yeah, I think number one is coming to things like this. I mean, I think that's how Morgan all got started, is that you had somebody with a voice who understood a need and was willing to go out and get involved and come to these types of things and look for help. But in addition to that, it was the process of working with Morgan City and Morgan County, because we're doing both. Was really fairly simple. I mean, it was about having policies in place for pole attachment agreements or conduit lease agreements, whatever your city has. In the case of Morgan, they didn't have conduit in the ground, but Morgan has their own power company, and so having those pole attachment agreements and making those pole attachment agreements realistic for companies like us to come and sign, meaning from a cost standpoint, from a working with the city and so forth. It was very easy. I went in multiple times, had discussions with the mayor and other people on the team, and it was pretty straightforward. The simple things like that make a huge difference. I think that it did in Morgan. Things that you can continue to do in Morgan and in Mountain Green and other places are to continue to look at opportunities like Lynne has just spoke of. If the city is planning on doing an irrigation build, if the city is planning on upgrading power lines or whatever it happens to be, look at opportunities to expand beyond that. If you're digging trenches, throw conduit in the ground. Require it of developers. Developers are, for the most part, happy to throw additional conduits in the ground in new areas that are being developed throughout the city. Those types of things are things that will attract additional providers to come in to provide business services, residential services to the citizens of whatever city, county, municipality you're part of.
Does anyone else have
Well, I would say, as you do the franchise agreements, it's beneficial to not just not just the cities and also the providers that come along with it. If you make the investment to put the conduit in, there is lease costs back to the companies that want to use them. It's a revenue center for the city. So you're bringing providers in. There's an opportunity for some revenue across that. Be creative. Lynne talked about, if you're going to open up for a water line, do this, and make sure there's opportunities. We're working with one right now that had I think it was a 10-inch water line that goes from the top to the bottom. It's a larger subdivision rather than a city, but a large one. They have a 10-inch water line that's no longer going to be used. And they're just going to go and cut out the valves, splice them through in existing handholds, and turn that into a future path. And it's a 10-inch, so we can start putting conduits down inside that. And future path, all of that, 4, 6, 8 fibers could then go in it. That's a creative use. I commend the city for that. So there's revenue opportunity. If capital costs for the construction are probably the biggest factor. The fiber costs have come down, those things, the electronics have come down. It's building throughout the communities that are bad. And if there is anything that can be done, and it may just be expediting the permit process. If there's enough opportunity, expediting the permit process is enough justification to come in and build. If there's less opportunity, there's more providers, things like that, you may need to incentivize a little with some conduits or other opportunities like that. But I think we're all looking for opportunities. Maybe not all just residential. We enjoy residential too, but the businesses in your communities too. I mean, you can put a lot of fibers in a single path, and we're learning to work together well, sharing a conduit and having multiple fibers in it, sometimes even sharing multiple fibers in a sheath. We can do those things.
Talking about all this sharing stuff, when I was with Utah Power Rocky Mountain, we would bully and not let you in the conduit. So this is good stuff to hear that they're willing to share because oh, well, yeah, one other I have a hard time with too. But anyway, we do something pretty cool. We have a JUC, Joint Use Committee. And this Joint Use Committee, who sits around the table, is the city officials from power, water, sewer. We have CenturyLink, we have Questar, and all of us fiber providers. Whenever a developer comes in, he has to bring a plat. It's the first time he comes, it's a review. He hands out a plat to all of us, we review it, we look at it, and we mark up what we want, where we want conduit. He comes back the second time, we hand him back the plat, he looks it over, and this is where we want our conduit, and the developer puts it in. All right? Then the third time, that's still not the last time. They take that plat back, look it over, and if they have a question or have a problem with it, they come back to us. And the third time is that everybody signs off, all of us sign off that it's now been okayed and the city signs off on it. Way important. This is organizing us like you can't believe. And I would recommend any city to do this type of thing because it organizes us and the developers know what their responsibilities are.
Okay, do we have any other questions? We just went through Joint Use Committee. That's actually one of the most powerful things you can do within your community is to get a Joint Use Utility Committee because that gets everybody talking and that puts all the cards on the table. Any other questions?
Just a question as to whether or not there are any ordinances that you think are particularly useful in any jurisdictions relative to the putting of conduit in the ground. Do they require that they put it in the ground, of course, when you've got an open trench, but do they also require the laterals be put into individual homes, or do they just require the conduit in the street? In other words, middle mile, I guess is what they call it.
There are several ordinances that, and every city or county is different. We've found, because we do business only, by the way, and if your question is mainly residential, maybe there'll be some parallels here, but there's an aesthetic CC&R, if you will, for the city. We've now started doing micro trenching to avoid a lot of the major tear up, because it's been proven now, even though it's not going as deep as traditional buried fiber, it seems to work, and the aesthetics are very, very clean, and it's a lot quicker. In fact, up in the canyon area, we partnered with another fiber provider, and then we micro-trenched up the laterals, if you will, into our commercial accounts, and it seems to work out very well. There's a aerial versus buried combination you can do for last mile in particular, and even if you did middle mile, we promote buried almost 99% of the time because of the efficiency. And in Idaho, for example, where there's a lot of fires and squirrels with a big appetite for fiber, buried seems to work well. And in some of the regions in Utah where it's very tough to carve through, aerial works as well. But I think, to answer your question, it's an individual preference, but getting ahead of the game is probably the best thing. No one's mentioned chambers yet, but in these small towns, the chamber pretty much rules what goes on, because they get a heads up on brownfield and greenfield type of developments coming in. They usually have a developer on there. They usually have the mayor. They usually have the PUC, heads of state. And that's where we try to go and represent the idea of whenever there's a dig once. And I love that policy. So that's what we do.
I think one thing to add to that is, I think we like to see the ordinances and so forth, right? We're not, I don't think that a few cities we've gone to and spoken with have said, well, we either don't know what to do, or we've got this big open thing and we're just going to let anybody who wants to get into it. And I don't think we want to see that either, right? They're or adding ordinances not just to how we approach digging and or where you're putting in conduit or whatever, but something that UDOT has done recently, which I think is fantastic, is the requirement for those of us that are using conduit, their conduit, is to do future path. It's been mentioned a few times already. Future path is a grouping of smaller conduits that can fit inside one larger conduit, okay, whether that be 10-inch down to 1.25 inches, whatever, and everything in between. And requiring those types of things from the providers or from the carriers, it allows for much easier use of the conduit. You can get more people, allow for more carriers to get in the conduit and provide fiber there. And I think that it offers a level of protection to the carriers, which is compelling to us to want to come in there and do that. There's been a situation we had recently where, this municipality had a 2-inch conduit, and there's already somebody in it, and they had 2 or 3 other groups that wanted to come in and get in that conduit as well. And as we looked at the opportunity, we thought, okay, well, this group that's here right now, we know them well. We're confident in their abilities and to protect fiber and anybody else who may come into it. And then you had a few really young companies who didn't have a lot of experience and so forth. And when we look at that opportunity, we say, well, wait a minute, do we want to put our fiber in the same conduit as somebody else who doesn't have the experience, who may not know what they're doing? It would scare, I think it would scare a lot of us away, a situation like that. So future path is a great thing to look at adding to any ordinance that you're implementing.
And just one quick thing to add to that, not even necessarily ordinance, but best practices of implementation after that point. We talk about sharing. We at least go through hand holes, sometimes put slack loops in hand holes. And what a slack loop is we come in, we're going to coil a bunch up in there so that if something ever happens, we can pull the fiber, because fiber's not like copper. You don't just twist the pairs together and call it a day. Without having proper best effort or best plans, designs to do this, UDOT uses boring. We have practices for boring, practices for trenching, practices for going through handholds, and those things. We participate in some that don't have those best practices specified. And we have one where another provider came and they came out of theirs, ran their fiber line right through the center of our slack loop into theirs, and then they made a slack loop, which made ours completely useless unless we either cut their fiber line or cut ours and undo the whole thing. So it is great to share, but you know, these guidelines need to be set up ahead of time, and whether they're ordinances or just defined best practices, they do need to exist. And UDOT's done a great job if you can replicate some of the stuff they've done.
One more thing on that, and Brad, it was funny, you and I were kind of talking about this earlier, but a lot of those best practices and things can be written up into some type of conduit lease agreement, right? If you've got a franchise agreement that you're going to have any provider sign, in addition to that, having a conduit lease agreement similar to a pole attachment agreement, where a lot of those best practices are written up in something like that, and we sign off on adhering to those types of practices. So, sorry about going through your conduit like that. Just kidding, it wasn't us.
I don't think it was you.
We won't talk about Geneva, right, Brad?
Yeah, exactly.
They went through our fiber. They speared it. So it happens. So that's more with sometimes your contractors that come through. Everybody has problems sometimes with contractors. Just keep that in mind. If you're with a city and organization, don't sometimes hold. I do hold them responsible if I have problems with your contractor. Trust me, they're going to know it. But bring it up to the company and let them know it. As we were talking about lease agreements, I'm going to bring up something that nobody should do within a city. City of St. George did something that has really tied their hands on their city pole attachment agreements. They put out a lease agreement which gave exclusivity to one company. So they have this wonderful power company that runs throughout all the city of St. George, and a company came in, Lynne Beecher was with them, it was Interlinks, and they came through, and what an agreement they got. Yeah, I applaud Interlinks for getting the city to sign off on that type of an agreement. They were signed off on saying, we are your only provider, and no other provider can come on this pole but us. We get a waiver because we're government and we are in agreement with City of St. George, and so we transport to connect traffic signals. I think we're the only other people that get on that piece of fiber. Everything else is either coming through us on our transportation section, and then they're digging the roads. And so instead of being able to take advantage of their wonderful asset that St. George City has, they have tied their hands. And Hurricane City signed the same agreement that St. George City signed. And so don't do that to your cities. Keep it open with a lot of providers. Invite them in, and that's what they're saying. Don't crush them down. Do we have another set of questions for these guys? Okay, go. I knew you would have a comment after that, Lynne.
Just one other thing that does. There's two companies now because I have my company with it capable of doing that, Skywire. And that causes us to do a little bit of fighting where there's only the two of us. But also, those poor power lines have been there for 100 years. I know we've all dealt with that. But in order to know how to get on a power line, and if it's that pole and it's capable of having that weight on there when that power line's already cracked halfway down and two other providers are on it hanging with wires going all different directions, and it's just the biggest mess. And literally they make us go and pay for a new pole to be put in. So there's challenges. There's challenges everywhere we go because we're working with old technology with our new technology and what's the best way, underground, overhead. And some of the little cities or if you're going to begin, overhead is way cheaper and easier, but nothing can beat underground and conduit. Nothing. And that's where you want to be. So having partners that will trade, partners that will work with you, the quicker and better you can get to that stage, it's going to make it so much easier.
Thank you. There's one thing that they brought up that was really interesting for city builds. If you haven't seen the new technology out there with fiber optics, with the micro trenching, microfiber, microduct, UDOT, we're going to microduct heavily. We like it. It's a smaller footprint. It handles deflection better. The fiber blows easier. It's got a better protection. And so our excess conduit, we're shoving microduct in it because, quite frankly, there's a lot more providers in this state than I ever thought there was going to be when we started. And you guys keep coming out of the woodwork, and I was telling Scott right there, I'm going, we've got to come up with a better process for processing your requests because I'm starting to get inundated on trying to get through with them. So as a city, plan for that and plan to see how you can make the partnerships work. We're not in it to make a ton of money with UDOT. I'm here to leverage our assets to get as many traffic signals connected as I possibly can and as many road signs and to provide the best communication system for our roads. That's our motivation, is to do that. Their motivation is to provide out to businesses and to the customers, and by partnering together, we can do that. So partnerships are extremely key with everything that you do with your fiber optics. If you can get past the vision and not be greedy. That's one of the big things with the cities is we watch this time and time again is they will come in, it's like they think their asset is worth way more than what they think it is. Heck, a company can come in under a utilities agreement and trench and install it themselves cheaper than a lot of the cities think that that asset is worth. So be realistic about what your asset is. Think about gaining economic development for your city. How are we doing on time? We're down to 5 minutes. Does anyone else have something that we haven't brought up on the discussion?
Just requesting you to provide sample ordinances or somebody to provide sample ordinances so I can provide them to the various communities.
UDOT, we provide everything out on our site so that you can see all of our standards and everything. We share that very publicly and open with all the cities. In fact, when you're doing something, a lot of the times within their RFP or RFI, they just say, please adhere to UDOT standards and please put it in accordingly. So we provide those out 100% for you to use for those items. So that's public information. No, I don't think so, Dennis.
Just a quick question for each of you. We've had experience working with most of you on federal permitting with BLM and U.S. Forest Service. In some cases, Scott knows that it took about 2 years to get a permit down to Lake Powell School. Just wondering what you all think about how can we move that process up and cut down the timelines required to construct fiber, projects over federal lands.
Okay, this is kind of breaking news for you. All right. Because of the BLM issue, we found something out quite shocking with UDOT. We have interstates that run throughout the whole, all of Utah and roads that are state roads. But when we cross a BLM portion of land, we found out that we don't own our own right-of-way. We're on fee and title for everything else within the state except for federal lands. So we have put initiatives out there. You will see legislation probably happen this spring with Hatch's office on it. Call in for your support for getting our right-of-ways back to the broadband usage. We've been in talks with BLM. We kind of went above on the heads and pushed on this. We have FHWA rewriting a 1982 agreement on who owns with the right-of-way section. It's a huge problem. This is something with broadband that Dennis brought up that was quite shocking to us, and poor Emory Telecom and Centracom. Centracom's project was the one that brought it to the surface when we did a field meeting. But if you have any BLM, Forest Service, anything Department of Interior, that's your canyons. Try to build a canyon in the state of Utah. 2 years is actually pretty fast, Dennis. It is, and that's sad because getting your permits through within a city is one of the biggest things that you can do to encourage bringing broadband in, is not having a lengthy permit process that's very unrealistic to meet. BLM does a really good job of a lengthy permit process on that section. I can get your archaeology done. I can make sure that we're found our dinosaur eggs or anything else, or your clam shells, and preserve the fossils. I have no problem doing that. That's okay. It's kind of unique history. I kind of appreciate that we do it. but just trying to get the paperwork to move is huge. We're going to close up right here, and everybody can take about 30 seconds, and we should be done.
I think Lynne's comment there is probably the best advice I have. I mean, Dennis, I'm not the best person to give advice on how to get through BLM quickly. Syringa knows that. Centracom knows this. UEN knows this. But 2 years is pretty quick. A year is amazing. I mean, we've got some that we've got out there that are 7 years or more on permitting. So it's extremely challenging. But Lynne and I had a discussion, a month or so ago, and you had mentioned that briefly to me, and that's about the most exciting thing I can think of as far as getting BLM permits. So.
Well, we win the major prize because we got a BLM permit in 2 months. 2 months. The customer was BLM though, so that kind of takes away from what it was. So.
I'll just leave you with this from my perspective. When you represent your individual towns and jurisdictions, it's a race to get economic development funding and priority. So, as Lynn mentioned, that there might be an increase in providers, service providers, but that doesn't mean there's a plethora out there just to pick and choose. So, if you are really going to represent your area, put an ROI together, get the city council, and move it up quickly, because we're here to serve you, but we have to go with the ones that I guess scream the loudest. And it is a draw for businesses to come in, because as tax incentives are put out to the rural areas, there's going to be fighting for some dollars in that. So it's just use your ROI head on that one.
Well, I've had years of experience with power lines too, with BLM and the Forest Service. And the best thing I did was go and become real good friends with that agent. I mean, I was like this, and not only the agent, but the people above. And I've gotten them through in 6 months, but normally it is the years. You just got to know how your local people do it, fill them out, and make sure you know A to Z. And that's way important. And maybe some way, somehow, our government officials will get the properties back in the state and not federal. Yeah.
Yes, I really hope so. Thank you, guys. This was great, and thank you for your participation and great questions. Thanks.